The 100th day of the Trump administration is fast approaching, and that means it will have been 100 days since Donald Trump took office, and that the first 100 days of his administration will be over, and the word 100 will be said many times, maybe even 100. President Trump made many promises about what he would accomplish in this period. He promised to repeal Obamacare, lower taxes, wipe out ISIS, get in a couple of rounds of golf, draw a funny mustache on the White House portrait of Barack Obama, install cable service on Mars so he can continue to watch Fox and Friends even after the North Koreans make Earth uninhabitable, and of course, issue new uniforms for NATO leaders modeled on those in the final scene of The Music Man. Now, some slimy elite newsworms in the mainstream media are complaining that, with the exception of the golf and drawing the funny mustache on Obama's portrait, Trump has not fulfilled his promises in his first 100 days, which are so very urgent because those 100 days have the word 100 in them, which is urgent because it's 100. On the other side, true freedom-loving Americans point out that Donald Trump has elevated a constitutionalist to the Supreme Court and that the Obama mustache was kind of a hoot, just saying. Now, to be fair to both sides, except for the mainstream media, because let's examine the true Trump accomplishments. In his first 100 days, Donald Trump has succeeded in not appointing a Supreme Court justice who would destroy the First Amendment in order to get back at those nasty Citizens United people who had the unmitigated gall to make a mean video about Hillary Clinton, saying she wouldn't have been as great a president as she's been pretending to be in her bathroom mirror since she was 11 years old. Trump has also managed against all odds not to appoint a Supreme Court justice who would erase the Second Amendment in the belief that guns are icky and who needs them when you've got perfectly good bodyguards who can carry guns for you. Trump has also succeeded in not deposing a bunch of overseas tyrants and leaving utter chaos in their wake. He hasn't opened our borders to every drug lord with an accent out of Treasure of Sierra Madre who wants to set up shop in Phoenix, and he hasn't worn colorless pantsuits while making speeches in a screechy voice that sounds like a tomcat mating with a pterodactyl. Now, sure, some might say that it's not enough just to point out that Donald Trump isn't Hillary Clinton, and I'm sure they must mean something by that, but I can't imagine what it is. In conclusion, I think we can safely say that this first 100 days of the Donald Trump's presidency has been the single greatest 100 days that ever happened instead of the 100 days that would have happened if Donald Trump hadn't been president for the last 100 days. Trigger warning, I'm Andrew Klavan, and this is The Andrew Klavan Show.
I feel hunky-dunky, life is tickety-boo. Birds are winging, also singing hunky-dunky-doo. Ship-shaped, ipsy-topsy, the world is zippity-zing. It's a wonderful day, hurrah, hooray! It makes me want to sing. Oh, hurrah, hooray! Oh, hooray, hurrah!
All right, so I'm here in Oberlin, Ohio, to speak at the college, and it's a beautiful town, but I have to say it's got a strange kind of vibe because it's obviously this is one of the liberal enclaves of the world and very politically correct. So the town looks like a 1950s Ohio town. It's all kind of very well preserved. There's a five and dime. There's all kinds of there's a church. There's all the sorts of things you would expect to see in a 1950s TV show about Ohio. But everything has this patina of political correctness on it. So in the town square, there are four flags flying together. It's the American flag, the Ohio flag, and then the gay rainbow flag and the UN flag. So you know that you've landed in Oberlin. It's a very, very weird vibe. Very pretty, but very weird. I'm looking forward to seeing the students later and talking to them. Meanwhile, I've been in my beautiful hotel room, which you can see behind me, and I've been puttering around with this Skillshare program that is now our new sponsor. It is this really interesting set of videos. They're instructional videos about just about anything you want. So like if you're looking to move up in your job at work, or you're looking to change your job, or you're just looking to adopt a new hobby, there are over 15,000 classes in design, business, and more, just about anything you can think of on this website that give you the short videos. You can watch them for a few minutes and then go on to the next one or change your mind. But you can learn everything from logo design to social media marketing to street photography, and you have unlimited access to the whole thing for a low monthly price. You don't have to pay per class ever again. Like, in other words, you don't have to be afraid you're going to click on a new class and say, oh, now I want to learn calligraphy, and click on that class and, oh, yes, that's an extra fee. It's all for one fee. So I've been kidding around with it because I wanted to test it out for the audience. I didn't want to just sell it to you if I didn't think it was good. So I went to all the writing classes because I remembered what it was like to be an aspiring writer and feel that it was just this kind of dark wall between you and success. You didn't know how the business worked. You didn't know where to go. So I tried it out, just listened to all the writing advice, and it was good. It was really good, very short, 3-minute videos telling you how to prepare to be a writer, what kinds of mental discipline you need, how to set a time and space for your writing. Really totally useful things. I wish I had the videos when I was starting out, and even some stuff I may actually use myself, like how to market things. So it's really a useful site, and you can try it for free because you are listening to me. If you are listening to me, Skillshare is giving my listeners a month of unlimited access to the site. So you go to www.skillshare.com/Andrew, and you can get over 15,000 classes in just about every subject you can imagine, and it's free for 1 month. Skillshare.com. Good stuff. All right, so I'm giving this speech later on, and my speech is going to be about this fight that we're in over the narrative, because even though I'm certainly hoping there's not going to be any trouble here, I'm not expecting any trouble here, but you're following what's happening to Ann Coulter in Berkeley. She may pull out of the speech she was going to give. She said she was going to give it in public, and the police basically just said, we're not going to protect you from these fascists who call themselves anti-fascists, but are fascists who are shutting down the speech. And it's really, it's gotten to be absurd because it's happening to all my friends. Heather McDonald, Charles Murray is the one I don't know, and obviously it's happening to Ben Shapiro. And we at the Daily Wire could understand why anybody would chase Shapiro out of town, but that's just personal. I think he should be allowed to say what he has to say. But the thing that is really disturbing to me is not that a bunch of punk kids or even a bunch of outside agitators are going into these places and shutting down free speech. What is really disturbing is that now the mainstream left is trying to legitimize this idea that you can censor speech, that the First Amendment doesn't cover speech that they happen to disagree with. And of course, they call it hate speech because they live in this very convenient world where everything that they disagree with is hate. They are the bastions of love. You can always tell the bastion of love because he's wearing a balaclava mask and hitting you with a club. That's how you can tell the real lovers of the world. And they think that everything that they disagree with is hate. So now they have this new meme they're sending out that hate speech is not free speech. Hate speech is not covered by the First Amendment, which is totally untrue, but it's coming from very high-level sources. So Howard Dean, the former DNC chair, former governor of Maine, tweets out hate speech is not free speech. Hate speech like Ann Coulter, that's who he's referring to, can be censored. And here he is explaining his completely ridiculous reasoning.
So there's several things to think about. One, the United States has the most far-reaching protections on speech of any country in the world. Mm-hmm. Two, it's not absolute. Three, there are three Supreme Court cases that you need to know about. One, the most recent, is a John Roberts opinion that said the Phelps people, that church out in Kansas, had the right to picket horrible, offensive, with signs, military funerals. Two, in 2002, there was a Supreme Court said that cross-boarding was illegal because it could incite violence. And three, the Chaplinsky case in 1942 said that speech was not permitted if it included fighting words that were likely to incite violence. So this is not a clear-cut carrying on the way the right does. The right loves to be able to say anything they like, no matter how offensive it is. Well, Ann Coulter has used words that you cannot use on television to describe Jews, blacks, gays, Muslims, immigrants, and Hispanics. I think there's a case to be made that invokes the Chaplinsky decision, which is fighting words likely to incite violence, and I think Berkeley is within its rights to make the decision that it puts their campus in danger if they have her there.
Completely untrue. Every word out of his mouth, including the ands and buts, were completely untrue. First of all, the most offensive thing about this is defining speech you disagree with as hate speech. So the minute they start in with hate speech isn't free speech, that's ridiculous. Secondly, even what he was saying made no sense. The Supreme Court cases that he was citing, they did allow Westboro Baptist Church to picket a gay Marine's funeral, which is about as hateful as you can get. I mean, that's something that I would find genuinely hateful, but the Supreme Court said it was within the realm of free speech. So that I don't see even why he was citing that. In the cross-burning case, what the Supreme Court did was they struck down a law banning all cross-burning because they said you can't ban it altogether because it is speech. What they said was you can prevent it if it's intimidation. So it's not free speech for me to say, if you walk down the street, I'm going to kill you. That's a threat. You can't do that. And the fighting words case, again, that has been limited to essentially to threats or the kind of thing that I might shout directly into your face, which would be almost disturbing the peace or something like that. It has nothing to do with the political opinions of people like Ann Coulter. So every word that he said was completely untrue. Now, there's some people on the left, Bernie Sanders has been standing up for free speech, which is good to hear. Bill Maher, here's Bill Maher talking about the Berkeley thing.
But Berkeley, used to be the cradle of free speech, and now it's just the cradle for babies who don't. And I feel like, this goes on all over the country on campuses. They invite someone to speak who's not exactly what liberals want to hear, and they want to shut her down. I feel like this is the liberals' version of book burning. Yeah. And it's got to stop. Howard Dean tweeted today about this. Hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Yes, it is. Threats are not protected by the First Amendment. This is why the Supreme Court said the Nazis could march in Skokie. They're a hateful bunch. But that's what the First Amendment means. It doesn't mean just shut up and agree with me.
Yeah, well, Maher, I've always respected him for this. He's always had Ann Coulter on his show. We always used to have Andrew Breitbart on his show. He's a guy who actually does appreciate free speech and stand up for it all the time, and that's great. If you listen to Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, she sort of free speech is the cornerstone of everything we hold dear. It is the American way. It is the thing that makes America America. Free speech. There's a reason they put it in the First Amendment. It is the most important right we have because without it, you don't have any freedoms at all, really. So here's Elizabeth Warren kind of skirting the issue a little bit, talking to Jake Tapper.
Former Vermont Governor and DNC Chair Howard Dean tweeted last week, quote, hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Is that true?
Look, Ann Coulter has just gotten a much bigger platform because someone tried to deny her a chance to speak. My view is let her speak and just don't show up. If you don't like it, don't show up.
Yeah, if you don't like it, don't show up is absolutely true. But on the other hand, I didn't hear a ringing endorsement of the First Amendment either. But the thing that's really appalling, and John Nolte has a good piece about this up on the Daily Wire, the thing that is really appalling is the New York Times and the National Review, I think it is, the famous left-wing journal. That's National Review is the right-wing journal. Who am I thinking of? I can't remember now, but it doesn't matter. It's their famous left-wing journal have published articles explaining why universities have the right to censor speech. The one in the New York Times is virtually illiterate, but it's by Ulrich Baer, who is the vice provost for faculty, arts, humanities, and diversity. And he's a professor of comparative literature at NYU, all right? And he writes, during the 1980s and 90s, a shift occurred in American culture. Personal experience and testimony, especially of suffering and oppression, began to challenge the primacy of argument. Now, think about that for a minute. That personal experience and testimony began to challenge the primacy of argument. So in other words, if you can say how much you've suffered, logic, objective truth, no longer matters. He goes on to say, freedom of expression became a flashpoint in this shift. Then as now, both liberals and conservatives were wary of privileging personal experience with its powerful emotional impact over reason and argument, which some fear will bring an end to civilization, or at least to freedom of speech. My view, and this does not, he says, represent the views of NYU, is that we should resist the temptation to rehash these debates. Doing so would overlook the fact that a thorough generational shift has occurred. In other words, the free speech toothpaste is out of the tube and we can't put it back in. Widespread caricatures of students as overly sensitive fail to acknowledge the philosophical work that was carried out, especially in the 80s and 90s, to legitimate experience over logical argument. So he then quotes the philosopher Jean-Francois Lyotard, libtard, I guess he should be called. Best known for his prescient analysis and the postmodern condition of how public discourse discards the categories of true, false, and just, unjust in favor of valuing the mere fact that something is being communicated. Examine the tension between experience and argument in a different way. You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of that wonderful show, Curb Your Enthusiasm. The terrible suffering of these college students. It trumps argument. And it reminds me of that show. There was an episode, one of the funniest things I've ever seen on television. There was an episode in which they invited over a bunch of survivors, Holocaust survivors. But one person misunderstood and invited a guy from the show Survivor, a guy who had won the show Survivor. And the kid who had been on Survivor started to argue with the Holocaust survivors about who had been through a worse experience. Here's a short clip of this. I think it's hilarious.
It was harrowing. You come across a taipan on the trail, you get bit, you're dead. 30 minutes flat.
I'll tell you, that's a very interesting story. Let me tell you, I was in a concentration camp. You never even suffered 1 minute in your life compared to what I went through.
Look, I'm saying we spent 42 days trying to survive. We had very little rations, no snacks.
Snacks? What are you talking snacks? We didn't eat, sometimes for a week, for a month.
Don't.
We ate nothing. I went from 100...
I mean, I couldn't even work out when I was over there. They certainly didn't have a gym.
What?
I mean, I wore my sneakers out, and then the next thing you know, I've got a pair of flip-flops.
Flip-flops?
We slip on the ground, on the dirt, okay? 118 degrees during the day, 98 at night with 98% humidity.
45 degrees below zero.
Did you guys have a bathroom?
A bathroom?
Yeah, we didn't have
We
one.
had 12 people at a time would go and...
Well, I'm sure you had toilet paper.
We had newspaper.
We had mosquitoes. We certainly didn't have mosquitoes.
You see this glass eye? Huh?
Have you even seen the show?
Did you ever see our show?
All right, listen, we have to say goodbye to Facebook and YouTube, but over on thedailywire.com, where the show will continue, it's Mailbag Day. I almost forgot to mention we're going to answer all your questions. Our answers are 100% guaranteed correct and guaranteed also to change your life, possibly for the better. Have some really good questions. So come on over to thedailywire.com and hear the rest of the show.